Irmid orta hirna den all nefa corfu in conchina sura in arganifra. Agus neart the gross of rona orin canida hort con creacha. On a scrooge, hoso for our nilla vriher, agus our nilla gani fasta. Agus go treat a creach no for each Christ, our dear. Direct we beseech thee, O Lord, our actions by thy holy inspirations, and carry them on by thy gracious assistance, that every word and work of ours may always begin from thee and by thee, be happily ended through Christ our Lord. Amen. Now take leaders' questions under Standing Order 29, please. Deputy Micheál Martin.
Taoiseach, the health system, Taoiseach, is in a terrible crisis right now. It's a human resource crisis. Nurses leaving the system on a consistent basis, and indeed graduates, up to 75% leaving our country. The A&E departments are in continual crisis. There's a general shortage across the board in human resource, from doctors, psychiatrists, therapists and many more. Now, the latest waiting list figures reveal a dramatically worsening situation in all of the categories and in all of the hospitals. There are now about 666,000 patients on a waiting list, a national record and, dare I say, a national scandal. The number of outpatients waiting for 12 months, over 109,000 waiting for over 12 months. Total outpatients waiting list 473,000 people. Total inpatient and day cases 85,000 plus. And then you have the pre-admit list 26,000 plus the 61,000 on the planned procedures list, which don't get into the official lists. We have shocking waiting lists for diagnostics, for endoscopies, CT scans and so on. And shockingly of all, there's 10,000 children waiting for over 12 months for an appointment in our Dublin hospitals. And if you go through the categories, I mentioned categories, you go through the hospitals. Waterford, for example, needs serious attention. The outpatient list in Waterford over 12 months has gone up 443% since 2014. 443%. I don't know what's going on there, Taoiseach, but it is incredible. Its inpatient waiting list is up 159%. Since the change and the downgrading and undermining of Waterford, the waiting lists have soared in that particular hospital. For outpatients, you look at the Mater up 55%, Vincent's up 56%, Louth up 96%, Limerick up 108%. Now, Taoiseach, there was a commitment given that the Treatment Purchase Fund would be given back responsibility for waiting lists. That hasn't got into gear yet, hasn't started its work yet. And I want to know why. Because the last year, when the Treatment Purchase Fund was operating, it provided operations for about 33,000 patients in its last year. And it did about 200,000 patients in all up to 2010. And the median waiting time was down to 2.4 months. There seems to be an incredible inertia, Taoiseach, and lack of urgency attached to this crisis in waiting lists, getting worse and getting worse and getting worse.
Thank you, Deputy.
When is the government going to show some urgency in tackling what is clearly an unacceptable crisis in terms of people waiting for urgent appointments and surgery?
Taoiseach.
Shown priority in what is allocated to the health area for 2017, as you know, at £14.5 billion. The government allocated €20 million to the National Treatment Purchase Fund for 2017, rising to €55 million in 2018. Last December, Minister Harris granted approval to the National Treatment Purchase Fund to dedicate €5 million of that to a day case waiting list initiative, with the aim of ensuring that no patient would be waiting for more than 18 months for a day case procedure by the 30th of June 2017. In excess of 2,000 cases will be managed through this process, and those patients Deputy Martin, are already receiving appointments. In order to reduce the numbers of long waiting patients, the HSE were asked to develop the waiting list action plans for 2017 in the areas of inpatient, day case, scoliosis and outpatient services, and those plans have now been finalised and will be acted on shortly. The HSE and the INMO both agree that the patient's time spent on trolleys waiting for beds has decreased. I would like to acknowledge the frontline staff and the work that they put into this. Notwithstanding these improvements, the figures are too high, and the Department continues to work with the HSE to identify further measures that can be taken here. In respect of your comment about nursing and midwifery, management have committed to increasing the nursing and midwifery workforce in 2017 with 1,208 additional permanent posts, conversion of agency-employed staff into HSE direct employees, maternity leave cover, offering all graduating nurses and midwives full-time contracts, a career break scheme, 130 additional undergraduate places this year in 2017, and offering nurses and midwives improved educational opportunities and career pathways. In respect of the HSE has developed an inpatient day case waiting list action plan with engagement from the Department and the NTPF. That plan focuses on reducing the number of patients, as I said. It's estimated that there are 39,000 patients to be treated by the end of October this year, 2017. And the plan sets a target to remove approximately 75% of these patients from the waiting list, that is 29,000 patients, through a combination of normal hospital National Service Plan funded activity, as well as resourcing and outsourcing initiatives utilising the remaining €10 million of Budget 2017 funding. And that represents a 30% increase in activity, which demonstrates the priority attached to it. Our hospitals are now carrying 4 times more procedures in patients aged 65 and over, and twice as many in the under 65 age group since 2000. Thank you, in 2016 alone, final point, Ciancorla, there has been a 4% increase in inpatient and day case activity over 2015. And last year, almost 1.69 million patients received inpatient or day case treatment in the hospitals, which is an increase of almost 40,000 on the previous year, which I think demonstrates the urgency and the priority attached to this, admitting, of course, that the waiting lists are too long. But this is a serious action being taken to address those problems.
Taoiseach, 12 months ago, the Government agreed in the confidence supply agreement to establish the treatment purchase fund, to re-establish it and its remit in terms of waiting lists. Nothing has happened since then. The 20 million hasn't been spent by the treatment purchase fund, and we're now into May of 2017. Those are the facts, Taoiseach. There has been a lack of urgency. We all saw the scoliosis crisis. It shouldn't have come to the fact where that was revealed in such telling and an effective manner on RTE. But there are still over 4,500 children waiting over 18 months for an appointment in the 3 children's hospitals in Dublin. It's scandalous, Taoiseach. We're talking about all-time records. Now, James Riley, Minister Riley these days, got rid of the treatment purchase fund. And we're now back to the same sort of massaging of figures that he engaged in, widening the timelines, saying we're going to concentrate on the above 18 months. Restore the treatment purchase fund. Don't try and micromanage it. Let it get its systems back, and the forensic way it tackled waiting lists in the past get back into play, because too many people, and in particular too many children, are waiting far too long. The execution, Taoiseach, and the delivery of the resolution of these crises simply is not happening in the health area, and clearly is not happening in waiting lists and the waiting times, because they're simply getting longer every time the figures are published, and there's no appreciable gain or sense that the government are getting on top of the issue.
Taoiseach. Negotiations and discussions we had about formation of government, it was agreed, indeed at your own suggestion, that the National Treatment Purchase Fund would be restored. The restoration was 20 million for 2017, rising to 55 million for 2018. Now, it's not true to say that nothing is happening here, Deputy Martin. The NTPF have now commenced the initiative of the 5 million for day case waiting list initiative, which was approved last December. Well, let me finish. It's expected that in excess of 2,000 patients will receive treatment under this initiative, 2,000 off that waiting list. Secondly, in respect of the outpatient waiting list. It's estimated that there are over 190,000 patients who fall into this category, and the plan sets a target to remove over 50% of these from the waiting list. That is over 95,000 patients. That represents around 5,000 extra patients, a 5% increase in activity from last year in this particular patient cohort. And as I said to you, in respect of the NTPF and the inpatient day case waiting list action plan, they hope to have 39,000 persons treated by the end of October. And the plan sets a target to remove 75% of these patients from the waiting list. That is over 29,000 patients between the normal hospital service plan funded activity, as well as insourcing and outsourcing initiatives, utilising the remaining 10 million of the budget for 2017. So it is being spent and is making serious inroads into the numbers that I've already outlined for you on the initiatives undertaken by it.
Taoiseach, Deputy Jerry Adams, please.
Margaret Concollier. Taoiseach, I understand that documentation has been given to the Public Accounts Committee by John Barrett, which completely contradicts and undermines the account given by the Commissioner O'Sullivan last Thursday about our conversations with Mr Barrett over financial irregularities in Templemore. And this latest development today comes after contradictory statements from Commissioner O'Sullivan and the Executive Director of Human Resources, the aforementioned Mr Barrett. So I want to ask you why you won't end the never-ending crisis and scandal surrounding the senior management of Garda Síochána. And this latest development, this controversy, follows on the scandal of homicide figures, the falsification of 1 million breath tests, 1 million, the 14,700 unsafe convictions for driving offences, and you'll recall that all of this was preceded by allegations of a smear campaign against brave whistleblower Sergeant Maurice McCabe. And I'm also very concerned about your refusal to act on detailed information which I gave you 18 months ago about the killing of Garda, Tony Golden and other issues arising from that dreadful event. And your government and you have resisted all attempts to rectify these matters and to bring in the deep-rooted reforms that are required. Now, you may say, yes, we're bringing in reforms now, but you've done so with extreme reluctance and only after serial scandals. And your reforms don't go far enough. The last government led by you voted against a detailed submission by Sinn Féin for root and branch reform of Garda Síochána, including an independent policing board similar to that proposed by the Patton Commission in the North. And, you know, in all of this, let's be clear, you weren't on your own. Way back in 2005, Teachta O'Snodig made the same case to a Fianna Fáil-led government and to then Minister Michael McDowell. And at that time, Mr McDowell argued that there was not a level of corruption, incompetence or bad faith within Garda Síochána which would warrant this. And you made exactly the same argument 10 years later. And now in 2017, you've reiterated your confidence in the Garda Commissioner. Taoiseach, the Commissioner's position is untenable. But it's not easy to understand why you will not remove her from office. There's no rational explanation. The majority of parties here in Leinster House now want the Commissioner to go, and you need to act. In the best interests of Garda Síochána, for the sake of the people of this state, the Commissioner needs to go, and to go now. So will you finally accept this reality and relieve Noreen O'Sullivan from her duties as Commissioner if she refuses to resign?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
The Public Accounts Committee in this House, as Deputy Adams well knows, is removed from influence of the Oireachtas, and I'm not aware of the papers that you refer to being given to the Public Accounts Committee. They haven't certainly come into my possession, nor should they if they're given directly to the Chairman or to a member of the Public Accounts Committee. I have confidence in the Garda Commissioner to do her job. This morning, the Cabinet approved the nomination of Kathleen O'Toole, who is the Chief of Police in Seattle, to chair the review body dealing with the with An Garda Síochána. She is an outstanding person of very great experience, both in the legal terms, in policing terms, with a deep understanding of the situation that applies here in Ireland. I expect that nomination to be ratified by Cabinet next week. In addition, the Cabinet also approved this morning the terms of reference for Project Eagle, which was a matter that was raised by people here on a number of occasions. And following receipt of further observations from the Fianna Fáil party and from Deputy Wallace, I took those into account and had approval given for the terms of reference for that. These are actions that are being taken by government in respect of matters of public concern. I expect Garda Commissioner O'Sullivan to do her job as Commissioner of the Gardaí. She is expected to return to the Public Accounts Committee. Again, I understand in later either this month or next month, and not quite sure of the date, but I understand that she is to go back again for further discussion with the committee. I referred previously, Deputy Adams, to the sad and unfortunate and tragic death of Tony Golden. And I said to you that there are two parallel investigations going on in respect of that murder at the moment, and the DPP and all of the evidence that you gave to me and to the Minister for Justice has been transferred to those who deal with it now. Obviously, I think it's important that those investigations into this sad and tragic case will be allowed to be followed through, taking into account the information that you supplied. Whether that be information that can stand up or not, it's not for me to comment on its veracity. I'm sure you wouldn't have given it to me without a good reason for myself to do so.
Deputy Adams.
Chuck, the big problem out there for many, many people is that no one in the upper echelons of this state is ever held to account. Now, I know that politicians may have our comeuppance at an election if that's the electorate's will, but the big issue is the lack of accountability for bankers or financiers or developers or senior public officials and policymakers. And people are asking who is held to account for the mistreatment of children, for women, for people with disabilities, for the crisis in homelessness, in our health service, and for the administration of policing and justice. Now, your government retained the right to appoint the Garda Commissioner. You didn't have to do so. You could have went with the motion which we put, and that's why I asked you to remove the Garda Commissioner. And then we have the situation where Fianna Fáil says it has no confidence in the Commissioner, but that it does support your government, which continues to express confidence in the Commissioner. But this isn't new politics. This is more of the same old story. So you've set your face against removing the Commissioner. You've just said you have confidence in her. Have you and the Fianna Fáil leader discussed this issue?
The answer to the last question is no.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Richard Boyd Barrett.
Thanks, Ciarán Comhairle. Taoiseach, today again we had yet another damning piece of evidence of the abysmal failure of your government to deal with the spiralling rental, housing and homelessness crisis, with the DAFT report showing that rents have jumped by a record 13% in the last year, €134 per month on average over the course of a year, guaranteeing to further escalate that crisis, lead to more emergency situations, more evictions, more people in homeless accommodation. Now, typically, Taoiseach, you say, or the Minister says, we inherited this, it takes time to deal with the problem, we're on it. Now, I want to cite to you a very concrete example of how decisions you made in the last 6 months have contributed directly to this shambles and mess and the hardship that follows. And I want to cite the example of Robin Hill Apartments in Ballally, Sandyford, property originally built by the McAvady brothers in 2008, went into NAMA at some point, 52 apartments, and since it's been in NAMA, for most of those years, at least 15, possibly as many as half of the apartments have been empty, while the housing crisis spirals out of control. In May of last year, Dún Laoghaire County Council asked could they purchase 15 of the vacant units. They were told no, you could only buy the whole block. Shortly after the Project Eagle scandal broke in September, NAMA agreed the sale of Project GEM, including these apartments, to Cerebus, the Vulture Fund. And that sale went through. One of the biggest, that project, one of the biggest sales of property in the history of the state. Since then, Cerebus have moved to start evicting the tenants. In a block that is half empty, still, but the remaining tenants, 5 of them that we know of the 21 that I have met, are to be evicted in June. Others that Cerebus feel they can't evict straight away have been told that they are going to have to pay an extra €250 a month in heating and water charges, hot water charges, previously which have been involved in the rent. They've never been charged by that before. In other words, a backdoor rent increase of about 20%. So these empty units sitting there, while we have record numbers in homeless accommodation, evictions to follow, absolutely avoidable. If A, you hadn't sold this property to vulture funds and had given it to the local authority as they'd asked, and B, if Minister Covey had ensured in his bill before Christmas that when apartment complexes are sold, they could not evict tenants, as we warned you would happen, or find backdoor ways to ratchet up rents. The crisis is avoidable. It results from your policy failures. Isn't that the truth, Taoiseach?
No, it's not the truth. The problem here is supply of houses right across the country. Anybody can understand that there's real pressure on here in certain segments of the housing. You nod your head if you like. Did I read a report this morning where 49 houses were snapped up inside a day for those who could afford them, between 400,000 and 700,000? No difficulty or no problems in certain particular areas. It's quite true to say, Deputy, that there's a serious issue here. 40,000 houses, vacant units, have been bought by the state in the last 5 years. 40,000. Now, if you had given me the details of the situation that you're talking about, I could probably give you an accurate answer. But I can say to you that the report in respect of rent prices and rent pressure zones shows that the rent inflation has slowed over the last quarter. The rate of increase in Dublin rent prices between Q4 of last year and Q1 of this year was significantly lower than the rate of increase over the year. The quarterly inflation registered in Q1 of 2017, South County Dublin was 0.7%, West County Dublin 1.4, North County 1.6, North City 1.5, City Centre 2.1 and South City 1.4. I'm sure you'd be interested in the 0.7% yourself. Now, strong rent inflation is also seen clearly in the Dublin commuter counties. The increases are placing huge pressure on tenants, particularly those who are seeking new accommodation. And the daft.ie report notes that rent increases faced by sitting tenants have generally been lower than for those seeking new accommodation. So Rebuilding Ireland and the government's strategy for the rental sector state clearly that severe shortages in supply in key locations are driving these rises in rent. And that's why the emphasis on Minister Coveney's housing programme has been to deal with the question of supply. And I've spelled out for you here on so many occasions the initiatives and the opportunities and government action and money that is being provided for local authorities and for developers, private and public, to deal with the housing supply issue. There are cases of objections, there are cases of this, that and the other. But believe me, this is the real issue that government are trying to address. And Deputy Boyd-Barrett, you know as well as I do that from a collapse of 90,000 houses a year to less than 9,000 a year takes some recovery. You mentioned the point about NAMA acquiring properties. There was an 80 billion portfolio. It's expected that it will have done its job and given the taxpayer back about 2 billion plus of a surplus within the timescale involved here. And those who acquire those houses or numbers of houses are subject to the law of the land. The number of vacant properties since 2011 has been 40,000, as I say. The action taken by the Minister in respect of the second point that you raised had been on the advice of legal advice received from the Attorney General.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Boyd Barrett.
First of all, figure has just appeared of the state apparently has purchased 40,000 houses. I think the more accurate truth is that NAMA has flogged off thousands of homes, or worse, as the Ballally example indicates, have sat on empty properties in public ownership, and when a local authority sought to purchase them off them, said no, but chose instead to sell them to a vulture fund who is now moving to evict people and bypass Minister Coveney's totally inadequate legislation and ratchet up the rents on the ones they can't immediately evict, who I suspect, and the tenants fear, will be phase evicted because under the Tyrrellstown Amendment they can't do more than 10, so they're doing them in blocks. That's what it's almost certainly the case, and you allowed that to happen by selling apartment blocks. And how many more Ballallies are there? How many more of these in Project M? How many more people are getting eviction notices from vulture funds that NAMA sold properties to at a massive discount?
Thank you, Deputy.
Rather than give them to the local authorities. So the real issue is we have 50,000 empty properties in Dublin. And now, possibly, with this example, we get an indication of why there's a supply problem. It's not an absolute supply problem, it's an artificially man-made problem resulting from the behaviour of NAMA and the vulture funds, sitting on empty properties, evicting people in order to inflate the prices and inflate the rents and make more profit off the misery of the people they evict or who can't afford to rent those properties.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
I said 40,000 vacant properties haven't come back into use. Let me just clarify that. Okay. I take your point. Deputy. 1,000 were purchased by the state at a cost of 203 million. The others have, through the normal churn of reconstructions, sales, local authority purchases, and so on. The Minister is due to launch the strategy for return of vacant dwellings to habitable use. My understanding is that there are about 34,000 vacant units in Dublin, and believe me, there's an ongoing list of returns of vacant apartments and vacant dwellings for use. Yes, but the answer to your question, even you understand that you can't return these overnight in a state where you can allocate them to people. You've pointed out to me here on the last number of weeks about people being sent 10 and 12 kilometres to hostels and hotels because the accommodation locally wasn't suitable. The strategy that the Minister is introducing in the next couple of weeks is to deal with that very issue. Vacant units and apartments and houses in your area and every other area have to be the subject of a strategy to return them to habitable use for people so that they can live and raise their families.
Taoiseach, I want to begin with a quotation that's relevant, and it comes from a writer-director, and he said that the generation that won independence lives in the ideas we honour, the architecture we preserve and the battlefields that we yet can save. And that quote is at the opening of the report from the Moore Street Consultative Group, which was presented to Minister Humphreys on the 29th of March. Someone said to me recently that we're much better at recognising defeats rather than recognising victories. So I want to acknowledge the victory, the success that came with the report from the Consultative Group. The Minister had set up that group back in late September in 2016, and there were representatives from Fine Gael, from Labour, from the Green Party, from Sinn Féin, from Fianna Fáil, from People Before Profit, from Independence. There were TDs and councillors on the group, 1916 relatives, Save Moore Street committee members and also the Moore Street traders under a very able chairman. We went through a public consultation process, submissions, expert advice, etc. And at the end of it, we were all on the same page. We all agreed, we all endorsed the report, that the vision for the development of Moore Street Battle site as part of a historic cultural quarter that would capture that moment in time experience that you get when you go into Kilmainham Jail and other places. The sense of what it was like for those who evacuated the GPO, what it was like for those who were living and working on Moore Street, and also to recognise the fact that 5 of the signatories spent their last few hours there. We all endorsed preserving the streetscapes, the lanes, and also the regeneration of the Moore Street market for the traders. So much progress, so much success, with very clear recommendations and recommendations that can be realised. And we have that laid out, starting with the state as the custodian of our history and our heritage, then the advisory group under an independent chairman with the resources to do the work. Now, the Minister's response was she was fully supportive of the constructive approach. She wants to see the work of the group being built on so we can progress to the next stage. So my question is, what exactly does that mean in real practical terms, so that we can move on the recommendations from that report within the clear timeframes? We know that there have been years and years of neglect, of decline and of indifference to the battlefield site, and also indifference to the difficulties to the livelihoods of the Moore Street traders. So the question is, when will phase 2 begin? What are the government plans, and has the report come to Cabinet as yet?
Thank you, Deputy O'Sullivan. Taoiseach.
Thank you, Deputy O'Sullivan, for your question. Well, what it means is you require agreement. Obviously, there are a number of different parties here. There is the state, there is the City Council, and there are private property owners. The government made a decision by the end of 2015 to purchase 14 to 17 Moore Street and to keep it permanently in state's hands, for people to understand the importance of the buildings historically, their part in Irish history, and that was an important decision at considerable cost made by the state. So the state owned that. Clearly emerging from the side door of the GPO and turning left and moving down towards Moore Street and up to the Rotunda, these, as I often said, are the lanes of history. City Council themselves have a responsibility here, and of course elements of the buildings on either side were owned by private property owners. So what the government set out to do was, as part of the overall sensitive and comprehensive centenary commemorations, that the 1417 National Monument would be restored in the most sensitive way possible, given the circumstances that apply around it. And there wasn't agreement about that then. Obviously, it's impossible to proceed ahead with a proper structure and a plan unless there is agreement. And agreement always requires compromise from set positions that people might wish to adopt. So I recall being involved myself centrally in saying we should purchase this building for the people and for their use and for their enjoyment for all time. I thought that might have been of assistance in the overall programme, but clearly there was disagreement about the extent of the building purchased, the importance of all of the buildings in that street, and how one might restore, to some people's views, what the laneways up to Rotunda, where the general surrender and formal surrender actually took place. I'll have Minister Humphreys respond to Deputy O'Sullivan about the current position insofar as further progress here can be. You will appreciate that this being close to the North Inner City, where the state have taken an interest in dealing with issues of neglect for many years, is one where there's been a considerable measure of progress made. I would hope that if we could have agreement on an outcome here, that between the different parties involved, the state with its responsibility insofar as the National Monument is concerned, City Council, planning authorities, private enterprise might be able to come to some solution that would both enhance the area and at the same time, keep in context its historic location and the part that it played in what was a seminal moment in Irish history on our way to economic and political independence.
Deputy O'Sullivan.
Okay. So, Taoiseach, there has been a lot of agreement, so can we start to build on that agreement? Now, you're a cyclist, so you know if you keep cycling, you're building up momentum. But if you stop cycling, you're going to start to wobble, and eventually you'll fall off the bike. So, the consultative group have been doing a lot of cycling. We've been building up the momentum, so can we keep going with the momentum? Now, the government owned 14 to 17. And there has been considerable money spent on protecting that structure and securing it. It would be much better if that money could be going into the restoration. But we do have to keep that secure for the foreseeable future. So I'd like the commitment on that. We also know, and the Moore Street traders have played a major role in the committee, that their livelihoods have been under severe threat in the past number of years. That threat is going to continue with the work that's going to be coming on stream. So it is imperative that we make a start. So at the very start, could we have a date for the meeting of the next phase and the appointment of the chair? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy.
Yeah, well, I recall speaking to the experts in restoration and the structural condition of the building down there, Deputy O'Sullivan, and clearly you couldn't proceed to do sensitive restoration work without the building being structurally sound. And I think that's a matter for experts and engineers to determine how that should be done. I take your point. There is a measure of agreement here, and I would hope that having made a major move in purchasing 1417 for the good of the people, for the people of Dublin and Ireland for all time, that we could move on from that and build on that agreement as to what the next appropriate and proper step should be. I'll consult with Minister Humphreys and come back to Deputy O'Sullivan. I had thought genuinely that we might be in a position, as part of the restoration of the GPO and Kilmainham and the military archives and so on, that we would have been in a position to have 1417 restored and opened to whatever small numbers could go through at any one time. But because of the situation that arose, it wasn't possible to do that.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
The good thing is that it is purchased and owned by the state now. It is secured, and at least that's an important point from which we can move on, hopefully to have, a conclusion that would be in everybody's interest, this city's and our country's. Not to mention, not least, the people who live in the locality.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach, and that concludes Leaders' questions. We now move on to the order of business for the week ahead, and I call on Deputy Jim Daly to announce the order of business. Deputy Daly.
Corla. Today's business shall be item 4, motion framework agreement between the EU and Mongolia, referral to committee without debate. Item 5, motion PQ rota change without debate. And item 11, statements re Ireland and the negotiations and the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. Private members' business shall be item 101, motion sale of AIB shares selected by the Labour Party. Wednesday's business shall be item 5A, motion exchange of views with Mr Michael Barnier in joint committee with Shannon Aaron without debate. Item 11, statements for Ireland and the negotiations on the UK's withdrawal from the European Union, resumed if not previously concluded. Item 1, Civil Liberty Amendment Bill 2017, Shannon's second stage. And item 2, Companies Amendment Bill 2017, Shannon's second stage. Private members shall be item 102, motion Dublin Transport selected by Fianna Fáil. Thursday's business Count Corley shall be an exchange of views with Mr Barnier, Chief Negotiator of the Task Force of the Preparation and Conduct of Negotiations with the United Kingdom in Committee of Dáil Éireann and Shannon Aaron. And item 2, Companies Amendment Bill 2017, Shannon's second stage. Second stage of item 23, Sale of Tickets, Sporting Cultural Events Bill 2017, will be debated in the evening slot. I refer members to the report of the Business Committee dated 4 May 2017. In relation to today's business, it is proposed that the motion referral of framework agreement and motion PQ rota change will be taken without debate, and that any division demanded thereon shall be taken immediately. Statements re Ireland and the negotiations on the UK's withdrawal from the European Union shall be brought to a conclusion after 10:15 p.m. on Wednesday, if not previously concluded. The statements of party and group leaders or a member nominated in their stead shall not exceed 10 minutes each. A Minister or Minister of State and the main spokespersons for parties or groups or a member nominated in their stead shall not exceed 10 minutes each, and statements of all other members shall not exceed 10 minutes each. There shall be a 5-minute response from a Minister or Minister of State, and all members may share time. In relation to Wednesday's business, it is proposed that a motion re-exchange of views with Mr Barnier in joint committee with Shannon Aaron shall be taken without debate, and that any division demanded thereon shall be taken immediately. In relation to Thursday's business, it is proposed that leaders' questions shall be taken at 2 p.m, and that, notwithstanding anything in standing orders, any division which would normally be taken at the weekly division time on Thursday, the 11th of May 2017, shall be taken in the weekly division time on Thursday, the 18th of May 2017.
Thank you very much, Deputy Daly. Now, there are 3 proposals, therefore, to put to the House today. Number 1 is the proposal for dealing with today's business agreed to. Agreed. Thank you very much. Is the proposal for dealing with Wednesday's business agreed to? Agreed. And finally, is the proposal for dealing with Thursday's business agreed to? Agreed to. It's great to see consensus breaking out. On proposed legislation, Deputy Micheál Martin, please.
The programme for government does a very good provision that the facility to evaluate progress in a transparent and accountable fashion. That's in relation to progress under the programme for government. Now, I think this section of the day is about deputies standing up and asking when will specific legislation be brought forward by the government in relation to specific issues. But the time is coming fast, Taoiseach, when it's becoming a fairly redundant exercise, when you consider that there's 140 bills languishing in committee stage of this House. Now, I know the Ceann Comhairle, to be fair, has taken an initiative in this regard, but there are responsibilities on government as well. Government has produced but 23 pieces of legislation. Some of those not comprehensive or chattering, they're technical enough bills. And so clearly there's room for government to improve. I mean, there are some bills there that the government have left. I don't know why in the education field and so on the government hasn't engaged. And we're reading reports that some public servants are of the view that they're not pushing forward bills because the dail might get at them. Now, this is a parliamentary democracy, and I respectfully suggest people in the public service or elsewhere have to accept the reality of the dail as it is. And I would ask the government to publish the legislation and engage with the opposition in terms of issues to get the legislation that they might want passed, and not have it waiting and waiting in an interminable manner. And finally, if I may, Taoiseach, some of the bills at committee stage, there was an agreement that there would be a more practical approach to money bills and money messages, and you're holding back on that. You're not fulfilling your commitments in relation to money messages. There's a coroner's bill from ourselves at the Justice Committee, for example. There's other bills. So there's deliberate acts by government that are preventing the advancement of some of the bills that are currently languishing in committee. This requires action, Taoiseach, and I think the government has to come to the table with some definitive action.
We have 20 members offering. We won't be able to call them all unless we can be concise in their questions and answers.
I think we should get something very clear here, first of all. This is a very different working dail than the previous dails, because the government does not control the full agenda here. And one of the changes that we made was to give backbench deputies the right to put forward opportunities for private members' bills. And that's an important facility in any democracy. Yes, we had, but there were very few of them, as you will know, came through. We didn't have a backed-up list of 140. In my time in here, we had very few private members' bills. You could count them probably on in less than a dozen, I would say, in any particular year. Maybe I might be wrong. We now have 100. Hold on. We now have 140 of them backed up. Now it's very easy for a deputy to say, "Well, here's an issue. I think I should get a bill drafted on this." And what's been happening, Deputy Martin, is that the minister responsible, particularly in justice, then has to take that bill and amend it properly to deal with all of the issues that arise from it and that might not have been considered by the deputy with the best intentions in the world. And what's happening is that some of the bills that are being taken have to be amended very extensively by the Parliamentary Draftsman's Office to make them into a bill that's fit for purpose, taking into account issues that might be far beyond the central issue. Yes. Now, for instance, we have, at the moment, before the order and before the dail here, there are maybe 20 bills that are here, some at report stage, some at second stage, some at committee stage, similarly in respect of the Shannon order paper. Now, you're a long time around yourself, and you know in respect of money messages. The Constitution is clear here, and Article 17.2 says, "Dáil Éireann shall not pass any vote or resolution, and no law shall be enacted for the appropriation of revenue or other public monies unless the purpose of the appropriation shall have been recommended to the Dáil by a message from the Government signed by the Taoiseach." Now, if we were to have 140 bills, well, no, the point is. Let me make my point. Let me make the point. For instance, take Bill X, take the Coroner's Bill, which is currently coming in here, which Deputy O'Coilan is dealing with. The charge there is about 12 million. Now, if that were to be allowed through, it's 12 million of the vote that's for that particular department. And if you take 10 bills or whatever you want out of the 140, the charge then is taken off the vote already gone through from the relevant minister. Perhaps we all learn lessons, don't we? Perhaps we should have put aside, as Deputy Minister Noonan made the point to me, leave aside 100 million for private members' bills that could compete on priority for money messages that might be necessary to put those bills through. But I'm not in a position at Cancora to accede to requests just like this, that we should respond by having money messages signed by the Taoiseach in accordance with the Constitution, when we know the outcome of that. It was a good thing, a very good thing, that any deputy should be able to put forward a private member's bill. But maybe we didn't think it out clearly enough from all sides to say, well, what do you mean by that? Because you can't put through a bill that's inadequate, that's inferior, or that won't work. So while the thought or the intent might have been good, the minister involved might have to extend to amend that bill very extensively. And if there's a money charge to be put on it, it does not, fall into line with the expenditure intentions and priorities of the department. So perhaps that's an issue that we should discuss. And in respect of the 140 bills, I know that there's a discussion to be had through your chairmanship, Count Corla, as to what the parties want as their priorities out of that 140.
It appears that the Business Committee will need to engage with the Taoiseach's department to try and resolve those matters. Deputy Jerry Adams, please. Well,
Margaret Concordia, in the programme for government, there's a commitment to holding a number of constitutional referendums, including on Article 40.61 on the offence of blasphemy. And this arises from the good work of the Constitutional Convention. You'll recall, Taoiseach, that the English actor Stephen Fry gave an interview to Guy Byrne on the issue of faith and God. And as a result of a single complaint, we had the spectacle of Mr Fry being investigated by the Gardaí on a criminal charge of blasphemy. Now, that investigation is not now going ahead, and I welcome that. But this story was widely reported in the international media with appropriate mocking commentary and some disbelief. Taoiseach, blasphemy should have no place in the Constitution. Minister Coveney indicated several days ago that the government might hold a referendum down next year to deal with the repeal of the 8th Amendment and the extension of the vote to citizens outside the state. So will the Taoiseach give a commitment that the removal of blasphemy from the Constitution will also be included, or a separate referendum will be held as soon as possible? And will you give citizens the opportunity to say clearly, down with that sort of thing, and allow Stephen Fry or anyone else to express an opinion without threat of criminal proceedings?
I note the comments and the current controversy about this. Let me say that I understand that there have been no public prosecutions for blasphemy under the 2009 Act. I also understand that the last prosecution for blasphemy by public authorities in Ireland is thought to have been back in 1855, which is quite a distance back. The current statutory provision for the offence of blasphemy is Section 36 of the 2009 Act, which defines what constitutes blasphemy, what defences and what penalties apply. My own party actually opposed the inclusion of the offence of blasphemy in the bill at that time. But the Act was introduced following the advice of successive Attorneys General that it was required, following the Supreme Court's decision in Cancol in what was known as the Corway case, in order to give legislative effect to the offence of blasphemy contained in Article 46(1)(1) of the Constitution. The Defamation Act abolished the possibility, formerly available under common law, of a private individual bringing a prosecution for blasphemy. And that Corway case was a rare example of such a private prosecution, but was unsuccessful. Now, Deputy Adams quite rightly raises the point about you have to have a referendum to deal with this matter. The Constitution, adopted in 1937, provides 46(1) that blasphemy is a criminal offence. This article describes the constitutional right to freedom of expression and its limits, and states that the public utterance of blasphemous, seditious or indecent matter is an offence which shall be punishable in accordance with the law. I might just say, Ceann Comhairle, that the previous government agreed that there should be a referendum on blasphemy. It's a case of government finding an opportunity to deal with this. There are a number of others arising from the Constitutional Convention that were recommended and agreed that there should be referenda on. And clearly, in respect of the Citizens' Assembly, in respect of Article 43(3), there will be a requirement for a referendum in due course on that.
Thank you,
so I'd originally thought, Ceann Comhairle, that it might be possible to hold a number of referenda on one day. But when you get into these things and people begin to understand the fors and the against, the yeses and the nos, it's not as simple as it might sound. So there are quite a deal of referenda backed up here, and you know they take time with referendum commissions to be independent in their analysis and give people full information so that they can vote either yes or no to whatever question is asked, and this is one of them.
Deputy Brendan Howland.
As journalist Gavin Riley has pointed out in an analysis piece published yesterday, although there are currently 9 sitting justices of the Supreme Court, Justice Mary Laffoy and the Chief Justice Susan Denham are both due to retire this year. And meanwhile, Justice Peter Charlton is obviously going to be completely occupied by the disclosures tribunals for the foreseeable future. That will reduce by August the number of sitting Supreme Court judges available to 6. Obviously, that is not an acceptable situation if the capacity of the Supreme Court is cut by a third. So can I ask you, Taoiseach, when will the appointments be made, and when will the legislation, more importantly, be agreed by these houses? When will the government position be clear on judicial appointments, so that we can not only fill these vacancies that are going to arise in coming months, but also the other vacancies that arise in other courts that now need to be filled as a matter of urgency?
Thank you, Deputy Howland. Taoiseach.
The question here, Ceann Comhairle. As you're aware, vacancies are recommended for filling by a process to the Minister for Justice. There was one vacancy arising from the death of an esteemed Supreme Court judge that wasn't filled, and that wasn't recommended to be filled because the Court of Appeal was taking quite a number of cases that would normally go to the Supreme Court. That was the purpose of the Court of Appeal being set up. So in the normal course of events, a number of members of the judiciary have been appointed recently on foot of the recommendations that have come in reduced numbers from the Judicial Appointments Board. I expect that the legislation dealing with judicial appointments will come before Cabinet next Tuesday.
Thank you very much, Deputy Michael D. Ray.
Thank you very much, Ceann Comhairle. Today, there is 3,099 farmers awaiting to be paid their glass payments. This has gone on far too long. Farmers are being punished for IT failures within the department, and this is simply not fair. I urge you and the Minister for Agriculture to put farmers out of their financial misery and to finally pay them their hard-earned money. There are 187 farmers in Kerry struggling to pay their bills, awaiting this money, and I know every one of them. And I'd very much like it, Taoiseach, if you and the Minister could get them paid as a matter of urgency.
Topical issue, I think, Deputy.
Well, no, it's very, you see, if you look at the programme for government, and I studied it, Ceann Comhairle, he is entitled, and I was there for it, he's entitled to answer it. Okay. And he should answer it.
Well, it seems as if Deputy Leader